It's worth spending a little bit more money on design, actually, and maybe even spending more money on construction. Because we all know, if you spend more money on design and construction, you can reduce the operating cost of the facility considerably. But what we also know, but perhaps lack evidence for, is to what extent a really well designed, built and operated facility can leverage the big circle on the right. What if we knew as an industry how to build an office building which made a company 10% more money because the workers in the office building were 10% more productive? And if you don't like the business argument, then the social argument is equally valid. What if we knew how to build schools which would deliver better educational outcome because of the quality of the built environment provided for the teachers and the students to work in? The short thing is that we do. This was a green school, this was a sustainable school built in Liverpool almost a decade ago now. Built as a green school, tremendous example of working with the children as well to help with the design and use of the facility. This became the best performing school in the whole of the United Kingdom. Sustainability delivers quality of life, sustainability delivers value. Thank you very much.
The coming speech will be delivered by Mr. Michael Salmon, the past president of CIOB Middle East and director of Drake & Skull, about the experience of sustainable buildings and infrastructures in the Middle East.
Your Excellency, Presidents, fellow members, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm a practitioner. So I've been in construction for 45 plus years. So what I'm going to talk about is more looking at my aspects of my vision of construction. I've also got to learn how to use this. It's the bottom one, is it? Okay, that's a good step. We're in an educational establishment, but I like to think, and I've taught my children, that throughout life itself is an education, from when we're first born to when we die. And I'm closer to death than I am to birth. And I'm still learning, which is good. So, what's our experience in the Middle East? I didn't actually say, but I worked in the Middle East for 7 years. I've recently retired. This is when you say you don't look old enough, okay? But I am old enough. I've reached that age. But yeah, I worked in Dubai for 7 years for a major construction company. And the company operates throughout the Middle East, not in Bahrain, but certainly throughout the other countries in the Middle East. So where I'm saying here, our experiences in the Middle East, is my personal experience, but it's also some of the experiences I've had working in this large construction company. The construction company I work for, basically, in terms of revenues, last year was about £1 billion, about 5 billion dirhams. So it's a representative of one of the larger construction companies. I talked about education, and when we think about green, when somebody said to me, greenhouse gas emissions, when we started to talk about greenhouse gases, you sort of develop a picture of what a greenhouse gas is, you know? Is it something that you go into the greenhouse and you see some gas? Certainly not. It comes out of obviously the Kyoto Protocol that was developed in 1995. But as a response to the protocols that were set in 95, bearing in mind it's only 20 years since the protocol was set, there's been a lot of advancement, and Don actually covered a lot of the points in terms of that advancement, in terms of the theoretical side of the advancement. I'm looking more at the practical side and thinking about what us as individuals think, because I think it is down to the individual. I've come to that conclusion. It's not about governments dictate. Well, it is about governments dictating, because without government dictating, it's very difficult to follow through and to make things work. But at the same time, it's about the individual and how you think. And so you have to excuse me because I've got a bit of a crane neck. I should have the presentation. Oh, it is in front of me. Excuse me. But obviously, green building and green building codes and green building councils have been developed. I'm going to run through this slide fairly quickly, but you've got the United States Green Building Council. You've actually got the Emirates Green Building Council, which is based in Dubai. We talked earlier about leadership. Now, leadership obviously comes from the top, and federal leadership, Executive Order 13514, when I first researched this paper, I looked into this, and I thought, well, that sounds very interesting. Where does that come from? It's actually a signed order by Barack Obama, signed in 2009, and it was meant to set the leadership parameters for all of the agencies in the United States, and I assume that they are following the rules and the parameters laid down by this executive order. And they have, to be fair, developed their own Green Building Council. They have LEED as a rating standard, which I'll come on to later. And so, to a certain extent, the US have led from the front. The UK were first to legislate before the US in 2000. The US was 2009. The UK legislated in 2008. And some of the targets that the UK set have been laid out by Don in his talk about the 80% less carbon by 2050, I think. The Middle East Center for Sustainable Development is based in Dubai. I'm talking about organizations now that are influencing sustainability. Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design is LEED, which we've talked about, the rating standard. And greening and our attempts to reduce environmental impact and improve energy efficiency, obviously, is the objective. In terms of setting benchmarks, the benchmarks that have been set are clear for all of us. And we're all aware of the Kyoto Protocol, the UK Government Climate Change Act, and the Federal Leadership Order, which I talked about. That's the background to where we're trying to follow through and deliver. There's a couple of definitions here, because sustainability, in my mind, without looking at textbook definitions, is about how the human interacts with the environment and how we treat the environment. Do we have respect for the environment, and how are we going to treat it going forward? And these two definitions, I've pulled them out because I particularly like these two definitions. How biological systems remain diverse and productive. Everything we need for our survival depends on either directly or indirectly on our natural environment. Sustainability creates and maintains the conditions under which humans and nature can exist in productive harmony. I like that, productive harmony, because I think we need to be in harmony with our environment. I'm going to digress slightly because I make no apologies to the fact that I was a runner for about 40 years. I've been a runner. Most recently, I've stopped running because my knee joints won't allow me to run anymore. But being a runner and being out in the environment is one of the joys of life. I can assure you, getting up at 6 or 7 in the morning and going for a run, there's nothing better. So I think the previous definition really describes nature and humans, the harmony part of it I really relate to, because I think we can all relate to it in our day-to-day lives. Our aims are to provide conditions under which humans and nature coexist while fulfilling the social, environmental, economic and other requirements for present and future generations. We're talking here very much about the future. This effectively means the control over the consumption of natural resources, energy, water, and the environment in order to protect human health and our environment for the future. Again, the future. What are the issues? The issues are clear: rapid population growth, economic growth targets, consumption of natural resources, controlling pollution, reducing greenhouse gases, and development-induced displacement and resettlement. Well-planned or rushed projects, one of the things that Don referred to. You know, what we're building for is for the future, and so therefore it's no good putting up buildings that you're going to demolish in 10 years because it doesn't work. It doesn't work for sustainability. What about green buildings in GCC countries? LEED provides a complete framework for assessing building performance and meeting sustainability goals and targets, and it also promotes expertise in green building. LEED is a set rating system for design, construction, operation, and maintenance. The important thing about LEED and assigning points to all of the whole project cycle, it doesn't only look at construction. It looks at design, it looks at construction, it looks at operation and maintenance. And in order to get the accreditations, which I'll come to in a minute, you have to satisfy the rating agency that you've complied with all the whole range of these elements of the project cycle. LEED has developed interrelated standards for all construction processes from early days in 1994 to more advanced and comprehensive requirements from 2006 up to now. A sample of statistics taken in 2010, and I do have some statistics in 2015 as well, to which Ghassan referred, suggests that LEED-registered projects, and to distinguish here between a registered project, which means that you've registered that you want to apply for a LEED accreditation, as opposed to a certified project, whereas where it's actually certified, you've been through the process and it's been certified. And these numbers are quite telling. The LEED-registered projects worldwide in 2010 was 54,600. And at that time, 623 were registered in the Middle East. LEED certified projects were 13,000 worldwide and 26 registered in GCC countries. This is in 2010. This number will have increased dramatically by 2015, one hopes. The LEED rating system assigns points in 4 levels for the whole of the project cycle, including the O&M phase. As I said, you have registered, then you go to certified, so certified is the first level. Then you go to silver, you go to gold, you go to platinum. And there's a maximum of 100 points for platinum, of which, in addition to which, 10 possible points for innovation. So supporting documentation and evidence is provided by the project leaders, by the people involved in the projects, to satisfy this criteria. Our experience in the Middle East so far, and I'm referring to 2010 and more recently in 2015, based on published statistics, LEED professionals registered in 2010 in the Middle East were 959. LEED professional registered now, 2015, 1,333. So professionally registered LEED practitioners has increased, but not dramatically, really, in my view. LEED registered projects in the Middle East, originally in 2010, 623. We now have 1,368. LEED certified projects, so they've gone for the accreditation. In 2010, only 26. The number now 163, so it is growing. The breakdown I've given below. In Kuwait, in 2010, 3. In 2015, 23. In Bahrain, 2010, 7. In 2015, 20. In Saudi Arabia, 39, and in 2015, 223. That's not surprising when you consider the amount of development in Saudi Arabia. Clearly, in terms of the construction projects, the number of construction projects being let and developed or constructed is far higher in Saudi Arabia. The UAE, although the UAE numbers are high, this is to do with the fact that their interest in registering an organization goes back to 2005. So the UAE have really been active since 2005, and this is represented in the numbers that are shown here. Oman, 15 in 2010, 25 in 2015. Qatar, 42 in 2010, 201 in 2015. So the numbers are growing. Are they growing to the extent that we want? Probably not. The reasons are very complicated, I'm sure, and there's multiple reasons for those statistics not increasing as fast as they should. But I go back to my earlier statement that it's not only about LEED and organizational certification, it's about individual commitment. And those of us that are involved and have been involved in construction, I'm sure every day in the morning when you go downstairs and you have your eggs or bran flakes, when you tip out the cardboard package, do you put it into a blue recycling bin or do you throw it into a garbage can that goes into landfill? Now, if you think about that simply, you might say, well, it's not up to me, it's up to my local authority. But the fact is you can influence your local authority because education goes both ways, in my view. And the fact that you actually communicate with your local authority or your municipality means that you could persuade, if you don't already have blue recycling bins for cardboard and plastic and aluminium cans, it's very easy to start the process. So this is where I think the individual has responsibility to follow his own conscience when it comes to sustainability. Talking very briefly about the UAE and the GCC as a whole, in the UAE they have their own rating system called the Pearl rating system, Estidama, which I understand means sustainability in Arabic. I don't read Arabic, but I'm told it does. And some of the projects under the Pearl rating system include Mazda in Abu Dhabi. They include the Qatar Convention Center. And the 4 pillars of Estidama are environmental, economic, cultural, and social. Don covered those very well, so I'm not going to talk about those further. The objectives of the Middle East Center for Sustainable Development, based in the UAE, are basically the Estidama principles. As a US Green Building Council member, and also they issue guidelines for all types of development projects. So we have a certain amount of leadership coming from the UAE, but other countries in the GCC are participating in LEED projects. Certification of green buildings in the UAE and other GCC countries also comes from the UAE organization, and they also assist with LEED certification. So for those that are interested, you can go direct to LEED, or you could go through the organization in the MECSD in Dubai. Summing up, what do we need? We need more participation in the GCC and at international conferences, like this one, for example. And we must seek support from other international green organizations, such as, and I've listed, I won't dictate those organizations, they're listed there to be seen on the slide. We should seek to register more projects and apply for LEED certification. That should be one of our objectives, clear objectives. We must promote the federal leadership, the document that was signed by Barack Obama. We should take ownership ourselves as individuals. My view about individual ownership. And my final thought is sustainability an object of desire, a dream for a better future, or an absolute necessity? I would say the latter. It's an absolute necessity for us and our children going forward. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Dear guest, before we take a slight break, let me take the opportunity to invite Professor Ghassan into the stage, please. ASU is honored to present our token of appreciation to His Excellency, the British Ambassador to the Kingdom of Bahrain, Mr. Ian Lindsay. Please. And we would like also to present a token of our appreciation to our guest speakers. Engineer Masoud Al-Harmi, President of Bahrain Society of Engineers. Mr. Donwar, the Chief Executive of Constructing Excellence in UK. Mr. Michael Salmon, the past President of CIOB Middle East and Director of Dark and Silk. Mr. Rick Hopper, Managing Director of Atkins Bahrain in Kuwait. Before the panel discussion. We will award them in advance. Mr. David Anthony, General Manager, NAS Contracting. Mr. Cles Blythe, Chief Executive of CIOB. And finally, Ms. Yara Tawfiq. Thank you, everyone. We will now have a break for 30 minutes, and we'll be back to our program. Welcome back all, ladies and gentlemen. We are coming now to the most exciting part of our forum, a panel discussion on sustainable buildings and infrastructures facilitated by Mr. Donwar. Please join your hands together to welcome the panel. Mr. Cles Blythe, Chief Executive of CIOB. Mr. Rick Hopper, Managing Director of Atkins Bahrain and Kuwait. Mr. David Anthony, General Manager, NAS Contracting. And our pretty lady, Ms. Yara Tawfiq.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. And thank you to the panelists who came back, despite having already received their thank you memento. What we'd like to do is open up a debate around the subject of sustainability, and hopefully develop the theme of the relevance, particularly here in Bahrain. To kick us off, what I'd like to do is perhaps come this direction down the panel, if that's okay. Just a couple of minutes, Chris. Everybody knows who CIOB are, but a couple of thoughts from you, therefore, on sustainability and what you've heard this afternoon.
I suppose my main thought is about making the pursuit of sustainability relevant. Different parts of the world, you have different challenges, and sometimes blindly following regimes sometimes can take you down the wrong way. And I'm very mindful of a discussion I had a couple of years ago in Qatar with the chairman of the Jordanian Green Building Council, who was having a bit of dispute with the US Green Building Council on LEED and the application of LEED in Jordan, because on some of the schemes which, where you're looking at the points for landscaping, you got good points if you only used 50% of potable water, which he thought was a bit ridiculous in Jordan because they don't have any water. So really, not being able to follow the LEED program was a bit of an issue for him, and they couldn't really follow that through to the end of certification. So for me, the issue is about relevance and actually having measures which actually relate to what was going on in the country. And I think that's one of the reasons why places like Qatar are developing their own, because it's important to have standards which relate to what you're trying to do.
Is it right that the LEED standards are changing for the Middle East, or being changed?
Well, I hope so, because if they don't change, then they're going to lose their relevance, aren't they?
David, I'm sat here between a contractor and a consultant, people who actually earn their living.
And we work together.
I'm not sure if I'm refereeing a fight or... David, everybody knows, most people here will know Nash, but what's your perspective?
It was interesting with the presentations. There's so much likeness between what's happening in the UK. There are so many similarities, really, between the rest of the world and Bahrain in terms of the problems and the changes that we need. Things, leadership, culture, and everything else that goes with it. One of the main problems, talking about water that Chris mentioned, it's not just energy we use a lot of here. We use a huge amount of water as well. The consumption levels across the board are so high, and part of the problem is the cheap cost of these products here. And this is something that we need leadership in Bahrain. We need to, unfortunately, increase the cost of electricity and water to make people think about what they're doing. And I think that's highly, as much as none of us want to pay any more, it's absolutely necessary for the future.
Straight on to the consultant viewpoint.
No, very good. I guess for me, it again is going back to cultural change, and not just for the native population of Bahrain, but also the expats who travel through. When I first got to Bahrain almost 7 years ago, I was working on a project, and this project required approval from the thermal directorate. And I went to go see the thermal directorate, and it was one gentleman sat in an office in the Manama Center on the 4th floor, kind of tucked back in a corner. And he said, "Oh, no, you don't need to see me. Your building is lower than 5 floors." And I said, well, surely it still needs to meet some type of environmental code. Or he said, no, you're fine. Come see me when your buildings are bigger. So right away, I knew that there was something different from working having worked in the UK before, and also having worked in the US, where even a small residential building will have area calculations for walls and windows and doors and all these kind of things. So that was a big shock for me. But I'm pleased to say that there is that change happening now. There's still a lot more to be done. I have seen that gentleman since, and just recently he's in a nice new building. I don't know if it's called Old Jafar or Al Hassan. It's right on the borders there with the Iwa. But he's got a nice big office. He has people working for him and listening to him because he's a very bright guy. So hopefully his impact and leadership within the government will make some of these changes.
I suspect we'll come back to leadership in a second, but yeah, how would you describe the role of UKTI in this agenda?
Well, UKTI is the government department that helps UK-based companies succeed in the global economy. And it helps overseas companies that would like to bring their high-quality investments to the UK. I'm not like you guys, an expert in sustainable infrastructure, but all I can say is that the UK is a leader in green and sustainable cities. They've invested in innovation, and they spent about £117 million over the last 5 years, and they're expecting a growth in spendings over 22%. I think the UK could bring a lot of their expertise into Bahrain, so and that's what we're here for, to assist any of the Bahraini companies who would like British expertise.
Thank you very much. At any time, if anybody wants to ask a question or interject, please just stick up your hand and I'll try and have a look. Does anybody want to ask a question of the panel at this stage? Sir, and then we'll go to the second question 5 rows back.
In fact, now the idea here is, and especially in the GCC countries, people are following lead, and at the same time there are some local kind of legislations like the peer system, for example. How do you see the idea of having more than one registration or more than one certification applied for projects that are designed, for example, in different countries? As now even in the same country, in the UAE now, the peer system is applied in the UAE, but still there are now two kind of variations between Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So how do you see this in terms of pushing the sustainability into being a standard practice for all buildings, not only the big ones, even for, as you mentioned, for all buildings? Yeah.
I mean, I'll take a stab at that to begin with. From my point of view, out here working in the GCC, you work with an amalgamation of different codes anyways on all sorts of different aspects of building and infrastructure. So take into account fire codes. We use a mix of NFPA and British codes. So I think actually having more codes and having at least that exposure, the government's having that exposure and choice to different international codes is a good thing. How you choose one or the other over the other, I don't think it has to happen. I think right now, as long as somebody chooses to follow the lead or follow BREEAM or whatever else is a good change. So when you make that next step to actually trying to make that into a government policy, it gets a little bit sticky, but it can still happen. So if you, again, going back to fire codes, if you read go see CDA here in Bahrain, they'll quote both British standards and NFPA every time you see them, and they take the best of both worlds. So actually, you end up with a ultra-safe building rather than a semi-safe or just passing a code building. So I think it can have some positive impacts, actually.
I remember working on energy rating systems in the UK in the early 90s, and someone saying to me, we had 2 or 3 competing systems even then in the UK. Someone said, it's like having different systems for telling the time. You know, it's not very helpful. We can't. So at the very least, what you need is a translator to bring them together. And people like BREEAM and LEED have worked at having some sort of way of having a rough equivalence so that you know that a standard here is equivalent to this level over here. But I mean, you know, different standards add cost.